Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and author of the newly released book. I believe it's at number 20, top Kindle seller in Messianic Judaism, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. Get your copy today. We're talking this morning with Sarah Quezada, author of Love Undocumented, Risking Trust in a Fearful World. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sarah is a writer and nonprofit professional in Atlanta. She has a master's in sociology from the University of Kentucky, and her writing has been published in Christianity Today, Relevant, Sojourners, and In Touch Ministries, among others. She's worked with Azusa Pacific University and Mission Year, and was scheduled for Emerging Leaders cohort of the Christian Community Development Association. She and her husband Billy serve at their church, facilitating visits to immigrant detainees at Stewart Detention Center in partnership with Refugio ministry. They're parents of 2 children. Sarah, you have such a fascinating story, especially in light of the immigration border wall, keep everybody out. We don't know the good guys from the bad guys. We love you, Lord, and we know that even undocumented residents, illegal aliens, or the whole vocabulary that's being thrown at us is what's politically correct, what's right. Are they all lawbreakers? Are they all welfare recipients? We don't know anything about it, and we're just filled with so many opinions, and you are immersed in this world. You navigated the entire system, and it's what caused you to write this book, Love Undocumented, Risking Trust in a Fearful World, because you brought God into an equation, into what's become a social political matter.
Yes. That was definitely my hope with the book, was to be able to connect both my personal experience with my education in sociology, as well as my faith background, which has always been, really the foundational way that I see the world and the way that I have walked through all parts of my life, including the immigration system.
So, of course, while you were growing up as a little girl, you decided that your dream husband was going to be a Central American, Spanish-speaking Guatemalan, and this was the man of your dreams, right?
Well, yes, but I didn't know that when I was a little girl. I definitely grew up with, my ideal husband was the youth pastor. I went to Christian college. My father was a pastor. And so I very much knew as both a child and then, as I was dating through my young adult years, that I was looking for someone who was committed to God first and foremost. I never expected to marry someone from a different country, and in fact, when I first met my now husband Billy, I was a little bit dismissive is too strong of a word, but I just assumed probably there's too much difference between us for this to work out. And so while he was nice, and I thought he was a little bit cute, I was a little bit hesitant of pursuing that in any kind of romantic way at first.
Let's talk about the early encounter. What brought you to even meet? What was the setting for that?
Sure. So I was attending a church in Los Angeles that was an inner city church plant, multicultural congregation. And so there were lots of different folks from all sorts of different backgrounds. Our pastor was from Guatemala. And he and Billy had met each other previously in Guatemala. Both of them were musicians, and they had connected kind of on the music tour circuit, I guess. And so while Billy, we were both living in Los Angeles area, but he was actually living about an hour outside the city. So he did not attend the church very regularly, but he would come once in a while to connect with his friend who was the pastor. And that's how we met. So he tells me, I don't actually remember us meeting until the third time that, that we met.
Well, you say that in your book that, hi, I'm Billy. Well, nice to meet you. Well, I've met you before.
Yeah, exactly. He loves to hold that over my head.
As a matter of fact, you say he reminds you he met you twice before, and that maybe the third time would stick.
Yes.
And so
third time's the charm.
It's a cute interchange. So you meet in Los Angeles. He's in this country, and are any of your thoughts given to his status or to what somebody from Guatemala, is it Guatemala?
Yes.
Yeah, from Guatemala is doing in the United States. Did any of those thoughts run through your head?
I had been working in social justice for several years. I had a master's in sociology at that time, but I had never really learned much about immigration. So I had international friends in college, and I never really thought much about the process that folks had or had not gone through to be here, mostly because the people I was interacting with were friends and colleagues, and I just assumed that these must not be the immigrants that other people are talking about when they talk about undocumented immigrants, because these people are great and they're my friends. And so I never really understood even how to know whether or not someone had come here legally or illegally. And it wasn't until Billy brought it up a little bit that I started to wonder, maybe I don't know everything about what's going on.
So was there an attraction first? Was there a connection first? And then as this began to develop, all of a sudden now, Sarah, I have a secret?
So we did when the very first time he asked me out, it sort of, we just connected instantly. I mean, I was really caught by surprise. I have kind of a quirky sense of humor, and he was getting all my jokes, and we just had an instant connection once we started to hang out one-on-one outside of our church context. And so the sort of initial attraction and engagement was definitely there. He brought up the topic of immigration very early in our relationship, so early, in fact, that I didn't really understand what he was saying. And he didn't pose it as I have a secret. He just started trying to give me hints. If I had known more about immigration at the time, I would have understood what he was saying. But he was trying to let me know, that he had arrived in the country on a visa. And in fact, he had a 10-year visa to be in the country. But then he started to kind of hem and haw and mention, well, but I am only supposed to be here for about 6 months at a time. And in my mind, I'm kind of doing the math, recognizing that according to what he's told me, he's been here more than 6 months. So I started to ask myself the questions, but we weren't at a place in our relationship where I could kind of press that. Right. And he told me that he was, working to get it worked out. And my thought at that time was, well, if this relationship goes anywhere, I hope that he gets that worked out. I thought it was like, I had just moved to LA a few months before, and my dad is the kind of dad who's like, you've been there 30 days. Have you updated your driver's license? Have you done this? Have you, taken care of all these details? And I thought that immigration status was like updating your driver's license. He just needed to go and fill out some papers and take care of it.
So this became a whole new involvement here, something that it's interesting. I guess everybody seems to have an opinion on immigration, but nobody really has a real good understanding about what the whole process or what the whole issue is. The media is driving the entire narrative completely, and when you get to a one-on-one story like yours, you begin to find out that there's a lot of nuances to this. There's a lot of things that are impactful of this. So what did you find out when it came time for Billy to say, I've been here all these years, but what was his story about how he got here, and what did he know? When, like, was this intentional? Like, did he come to America knowing he didn't have documents? Because here you are a believer, and you're someone that says, well, that I'm to respect the laws and decency and order and abide by this. And was the pastor aware of his immigration status? Was this something that just everybody kind of overlooked, or was this like, okay, well, here's the Bible and here's the immigration system, and we're going to set the Bible aside or set the immigration system aside? Well, we're doing great work. We're bringing the gospel to a lot of people. We're making a difference in the world. But then we got this other thing to deal with. Are we really lined up? Is this something that falls in the category of I don't want to say disrespect, disregard for God's word, but does that come into play at all? And especially you as a pastor's daughter, is this something that's going through your head?
Definitely. I think Billy, the way he sort of explained his situation to me was that he had, again, come on a visa that was good for 10 years, but he was supposed to leave every 6 months. And then he was sort of like, basically, I forgot to leave after 6 months. I didn't leave and then come back, because he would have legally been allowed to do that, leave even for a day and then come back into the U.S. And that would have all been above board as far as his particular documentation was concerned. And so I think, I talked with him a lot, both when we were dating and even in the process of writing this book, kind of revisiting some of that. And I think for him, he definitely did not have long-term plans to live in the U.S. He had come for a while, was hoping to make some money, maybe be able to go back to Guatemala to start his own business. He had, he was a young guy in his 20s who was not married, didn't have kids, and was kind of just exploring and doing different things. And I think I could relate a lot to that. I was living in LA at the time. I had no intention of living there long-term. All my family was in Tennessee and Kentucky and Georgia. And so, I myself was kind of out in LA, sort of trying to get some new experiences, growing as a young adult. And I saw a lot of that same posture reflected in Billy. The only difference was he had come on a visa and should have left the country after 6 months and come back in and didn't. And, I would learn later that that technically that's not seen as a criminal offense. It's considered a violation of a federal immigration statute. And so there were all these different nuances that I didn't even really understand at the time that set his case differently than other people who are walking through the immigration system. And so for me, learning some of those nuances helped me understand a little bit where he was coming from, of kind of, his parents had lived in the States for a while. His brother was a U.S.-born U.S. citizen. And so the U.S. had always been part of his life. He had come here when he was 8 to go to Disneyland. And, so for him, it was just coming and working in his young adult years, and hadn't necessarily been planning on, he was a guy in his 20s, his long-term planning, his ability to keep up with paperwork. I had some grace for that once I began to understand how he perceived his situation.
So this wasn't something that turned out to be this deep, dark, hidden part of him that he was withholding from you. he was just typical, that was a requirement, but the consequences for not doing it weren't motivational enough to cause me to stay so completely on top of it. Now, in hindsight, and you look back at the character of the man you married, he's probably much more attention to detail today as a father and husband than he was. So that wasn't really an insight into his character more than it was an insight into his circumstances.
Yes, and so I think, in the whole process of dating in general, you're really getting to know someone and who they are and their character. And so I had, for me, and I was nervous, kind of like you mentioned, being a Christian, dating someone, thinking about, is this a person I want to marry, trying to understand something that, yes, from the media and from these sort of anonymous accounts, I was hearing like, this is terrible, this is, criminals of the worst kind, but also looking at the man standing in front of me and trying to put it in context altogether. And so where things became a little more tricky, I will say, is several months into our relationship, he brought up the fact that he was trying to fix his situation still, and I was like, that sounds great. I think that's good. And basically through that conversation, what emerged was that the only way for him to adjust his immigration status was to marry a U.S. citizen. And so being a U.S. citizen in that dating relationship, that disclosure was a little unsettling. I kind of had to really think through that and try to figure out how to process that experience in the context of our dating relationship.
So your dad's a pastor, you're working closely with a pastor that knows Billy. Do you go to them for counsel? Is this your secret, or is this something that you've now engaged wise counsel and you're beginning to bring out into the open and talk about some of the pluses, the minuses, the pros, the cons? How do you approach this? If God brings you the man of your dreams, does he carry with him a tentative citizenship status? Would it be a question I would have?
Yeah, I think one of the things that challenged me in that process was that Billy felt very deeply God had called him to come to the U.S. And so, we talked a lot about that because, especially I think in your young adult years, you're trying to follow God's leading in your life. Where am I supposed to live? Who am I supposed to marry? What am I supposed to be doing with this one life I've been given? And so feeling like, well, is it possible that God called Billy here, but forgot to work out all of the details? And I, of course, now in hindsight, maybe God was working out those details all the time. And I don't know that I can, nor would I begin to, say exactly what God was doing when. But I think one of the things that always stood out for me was how much Billy loved the Lord and how much he was seeking to follow God in all of these things. And we did talk with our pastor. I had another pastor friend as well that I was kind of processing things through with at the time. And I think in general, people really came back to who is Billy? Who do we know him to be?
Right.
And, and I think I will say too, for me, I don't know, it's hard to know in the future, but I was open to, if we have to move to Guatemala, then that could be, it wasn't necessarily like, this is a deal breaker. It's like, well, if he can't live in this country, then maybe we'll go live in his, if that's where the future leads. So that was open to me as well. That made all of this a little less intimidating.
So to kind of take us, because we got a break coming up here in about 2 minutes, kind of to sum up this first segment. So you have an encounter with a young man, a relationship begins to form, you find out that he is in this country legally, but is not meeting the requirements that were assigned to have his status be legal.
Yes.
So he's not really an illegal, he's not undocumented, using the term of the day, he's just non-compliant.
Yes, but it did mean that he, as far as his living and working in the States, it was essentially the same as if he had entered without inspection or entered illegally, because he was not allowed to be working or living in the States at that time.
His status changed due to lack of due diligence.
Yes.
So there then became the specter of there could be a deportation, there could be, if caught, there could be consequences. Was there an easy way to correct it? Could you go back over and get it fixed? Or was the best possible solution to just kind of continue to head down the same path you were headed?
The challenge at that point, because he had overstayed, was that if he chose to leave the country at all, he could be banned in anywhere from 3 to 10 years because of that being out of status the first time. And so he was in a place where the only way he could remain in the States and fix it was to marry somebody who was a U.S. citizen.
Understood. All right. We're talking with Sarah Quezada, author of Love Undocumented, Risking Trust in a Fearful World. I very much appreciate you coming on to talk about this, because I think the entire issue of immigration, borders, legal, illegal, documented, undocumented, meeting the requirements, whether or not what he did made him, moved him from the righteous to the unrighteous side of the equation, whether or not we have a system in place which is conducive to equipping young men like Billy to stay and get them to do, and why the requirement to go back over the border 6 months for one day and cross over. I know that Israel has that requirement, several other countries have that requirement for temporary living. So it just shows that you are not permanently staying, that you are actually leaving and returning and re-entering the process so that the clock continues to reset and recycle. In the second segment, I want to kind of walk through what you had to do to get to that point where you decided that you would marry. And once you decided to marry, and as you tell in the book about it, there were certain challenges that you had to face and hurdles you had to face and defenses you had to give for justifying this and reconciling with both the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the United States government, as well as your relationship with God, being certain, surely certain, that there was no deception or evasion on your own part. And that requires a depth of soul searching that many of us do not do. So we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking with Sarah Quezada, author of Love Undocumented, Risking Trust in a Fearful World. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Sarah Quezada, author of Love Undocumented, Risking Trust in a Fearful World. Sarah, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much.
So Sarah falls in love with Billy, a young man from Guatemala living in Los Angeles, and through the course of their relationship, he is here on a visa, but he has not been meeting the requirements of keeping the visa in place. Therefore, his status has technically moved from documented to undocumented, from legal to what we would call illegal status. And this young couple fall in love and are trying to navigate. If we have to live in Guatemala, we'll live in Guatemala. If we have to go through the process here in the States, what does that entail? What decision did you make? What prompted the decision? And then what were the follow-up steps to the path you chose?
So we continued to date. When he originally told me that the only way he could adjust his status was to marry a U.S. citizen, his response to that was to try to break up with me because he is, to this day, is fiercely independent and really did not like the vulnerability of needing to rely on me for something like that. And so for me, the whole conversation was a little destabilizing because I didn't even know until he said that that was his only way. I was still kind of in this place of thinking, well, he just needs to do what he needs to do. He needs to do it the right way. He needs to get in line, go file this paperwork, and get it handled. And so what I didn't know at that time was how few legal pathways there are for people to enter and live in the country legally. And so, you know, a lot, I think, from my background of wanting to be welcoming, you know, I never really resonated with messaging that was like, immigrants shouldn't be here. I always felt, particularly as a Christian, that we should welcome the stranger, that we should be hospitable. But I did feel like, well, but, you know, people should do things the right way. And I think that's still a reasonable thing for people to, for the ways that people approach the immigration system, is that we have a system and we expect people to use it. I think where the rub comes is recognizing that the system itself is woefully outdated and doesn't actually allow for people to many times come legally. It's incredibly challenging, if possible at all, particularly from Central America, where Billy was from.
So you hear this story, and he tells you that the only way I can do this is to marry an American woman, and he doesn't want to put you in that position, but it puts you in that position.
Absolutely.
Without question. So what do you do? Who do you talk to? What does your pastor father say? What are your feelings? Are you in love with this man?
Yeah. I think for me, you know, all of that, I had never thought about I had never gotten close to marrying someone before. So all of this was a new experience of falling in love with somebody, thinking about a potential future together. And then there's kind of this big question hanging over of like, well, what if he's just a smooth talker? What if he's using me to get what he wants? And, you know, I think a combination of things happened for me. I think one, I was blindly in love. So I was like, well, we'll just kind of go with it. But I also think I kept coming back to what is his character? Who is the man that I know? And as I continued to pray through it, I felt extreme peace. And as someone who is always sort of indecisive about things and confusing, that really spoke to me, that I felt this deep, deep peace that didn't feel like it matched the situation, if you will. I guess maybe peace that passes all understanding. It was definitely what I felt as I was continuing to pray about this relationship. And I had the opportunity while we were dating to actually fly to Guatemala and meet his parents, which going to meet your potential future in-laws without your boyfriend there is just awkward. but they were wonderful and gave me just even deeper insight into who he was as Billy the person outside of Billy the undocumented immigrant, that was only a small piece, that he was living out the consequences of having overstayed that visa, but that wasn't a daily decision he was making, trying to deceive people or to, you know, sort of live in this kind of unstable state, that all of that had sort of was a result of the initial decision. And so how do I kind of put that in context with all of who he is?
So you get to the point where you've now met his parents, you come back home, and you still have this decision to make. Mm-hmm. First of all, has he asked you to marry him?
He, when I went to visit his parents, no, he had not asked me to marry him. He had told me he loved him, which I had awkwardly pretended like I didn't hear. And so when I came back from Guatemala, I definitely knew that this was something special. and that it was something I was feeling more and more committed to. And we had the international phone bills to prove it. And so when I came back from Guatemala, we got engaged probably about 2 months after that. And so we really felt like the relationship, we just felt really at peace and moving forward together. And so he asked me to marry him, and I was like, yes, let's do this. At that time, I had also assumed that we would be able to get his immigration situation worked out before we actually got married. I had heard people talk about a fiancé visa, that as long as you got married within a certain number of days, it could all get straightened out. So we immediately went and met with a lawyer right after we got engaged. Unfortunately, the fiancé visa did not apply to our situation, and so the lawyer essentially said, you need to get married first and then come back and see me and we'll see what we can do. So for me, that was very much a place of like, well, the future is extremely unknown here. What if it can't work out? What if I have to move to Guatemala? What if we, can't afford what we have to pay to go through this process? There was just so many unanswered questions, and I knew that I wouldn't have answers until after I'd said I do. And as one who takes marriage vows very seriously, I wanted to think about that beforehand, and I had to wrestle with, well, what if things go differently than I expect? And I kept coming back to, that's true in any relationship, that's true in any marriage. And so as we took that commitment together, I knew that I didn't exactly know what was coming.
So what did you decide?
We got married. We got married and began the process with the lawyer. And one of the things that was most striking to me that I learned through that process was the difference in the process between someone who had entered the country with a valid passport and a visa, and someone who, what they call, enter without inspection or illegally enters the country. Billy was basically told, well, yes, we've got to fill out these papers, you've got to pay these fees. I think in total it came to about $3,000 in fees and penalties and things. And then, everything should be right as rain in about 6 months. That was the kind of process I had sort of assumed he could do from the beginning, right? But the only way he was able to do that was because I was technically petitioning for him and sponsoring him. Which, as previously mentioned, he didn't really care for that arrangement, but recognizing that that was what we had to do for our family. On the other hand, had he entered the country illegally, I couldn't have just sponsored him. He would have had to leave, and there's a provision that enacts essentially like a punishment of, it's usually 3 years or 10 years that you have to stay out of the country. And as our lawyer talked through that with us, because there was a moment we thought that was a possibility, it was really challenging to think about, kind of walking through that particular consequence together. And also, I think for me, being sensitive to the fact that Billy came from a middle-class Guatemalan family who had access to getting him a passport, access to the plane ticket that he flew, recognizing that some of the most vulnerable immigrants probably don't have access to those things and are more likely to have entered illegally, and thus the consequences are that much harsher.
So when you, excuse me. So when you began to navigate this process, what's going on with your faith? What's going on with your trust in God? You're obviously now you're married. You're one under the covering of God. You're going to church together. You're in ministry together. You're actually ministering to people who are in this country illegally or in detention camps. You're in ministry. What are you thinking about God at this point? What's happening with your prayer life and these delays and these? You move one box out of the way and you find there's 6 boxes that you never saw because they were the line of sight was different. what's going on with your prayer life now?
I think one of the biggest things that I really wrestled with spiritually during some of that early time in marriage was recognizing both our gratitude but also our privilege that we had this opportunity to adjust his status. And I really felt deeply, how do we serve those who don't have access, and where is God present among people? Billy he was working in construction at the time, and we would have, sometimes we would have his coworkers over for dinner. I remember one party in particular, and recognizing that there was so much, I was interacting with undocumented immigrants in a much closer capacity than I ever had. And so recognizing not only their humanity, but also the image of God in these neighbors, but feeling like, so where is God present to people? Like, things that may be working out for us, but they're not working out for everyone. And what's our call and responsibility in that? How do we serve? When we were engaged, Billy and his coworkers went unpaid for a month. And, we had some savings and were able to accommodate that, as challenging as it was to not get paid for a month, but in recognizing that many of his coworkers, that was the only income for their family, and how do we help serve in those ways? And I think, I really became committed to immigration in a way that I never expected, because I felt God pulling me more towards the margins and more towards the vulnerable in this system, that so much of it happens. It may be in the news a lot, but a lot of what's really happening is behind the scenes. And I was kind of being led into that world, and I was really compelled by the stories that I was hearing and the things that I was seeing.
Did you find the process that you went through cumbersome, punitive, accommodating, fair and reasonable, overly complex, racist? What was your takeaway from your encounters as you went through the legal system, and how to try to get Billy's status was the first to get him a status, as opposed to him being in an undocumented status? Navigating through that, what impression did it leave you of our current system?
I think my biggest takeaway was that it was all so shrouded in mystery. We never knew exactly if we were doing the right thing or what the outcome of anything would be. So we had lots of different irons in the fire. One example is that for our wedding, my mother and father-in-law in Guatemala, who I had met, applied for visas to come to our wedding the right way. They did the right thing, and they were denied. So we tried again. And there's sort of this vague list of requirements. They met every requirement on the list. They were denied a second time. And at that point, we had to make a decision. Do we keep paying money to the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala, or do we acknowledge the painful truth that my in-laws would not be able to attend our wedding, which was what ended up happening. And so for me, that was really confusing, because I am a person who's like, you do things the right way. This is what you need to do. You pay your fees, you fill out your form, and then everything should work out. So I found that whole situation very confusing. Even as Billy and I went through the process, we heard rumors, well, you're not going to be able to get married because California is going to require a Social Security card to get married. That ended up being a false rumor. And then as we started the actual process, they can't tell you how long anything's going to take. You've got to do physicals, fingerprinting. Once we really started working with our lawyer, things started moving pretty steadily through. But there was still always this unknown of, there's a lot of discretion in the immigration system. And so we went for our interview, because you have to be interviewed, where they're essentially trying to vet if the marriage is an immigration scam or if it is a real marriage. And the anxiety of something like that, even with nothing to hide, we were really married. But we had heard all kinds of rumors from friends about the questions they were asked and all of that. So I think for me, my biggest sort of overall impression of the system was that it just wasn't always very clear what people should be doing. And as I've researched more, particularly for the book and in trying to understand even what we went through, recognizing that immigration reform has just kind of been stacked on top, on top, on top. And so there are these kinds of confusing ways that people don't always know exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
What wound up happening in regards to getting the status? Where did you wind up in this process?
With our lawyer, I was able to apply for him as my alien relative, and relationships between U.S. citizens and their spouses get preferred status as far as being granted a green card. And so we went through that initial process. He was granted a temporary, what's called worker's permit, which was gave him legal access to employment, but while he was still in that transition period where he wasn't technically a resident, but it was kind of like a temporary, you're in process, we're waiting to see what's going on. And then after our interview, he was granted a green card. And the way that system works for spouses is I think up to 2 years, if we were to have divorced, he would have automatically lost his green card status, which is a challenge for marriages, I am sure, and have heard stories of how that can be used as leverage in a marriage. But thankfully, that was not our situation. After 3 years, he was then eligible to apply for citizenship. So once we got married and our lawyer started moving us through the process, it was just slow and steady, lots of mail, lots of fingerprinting, lots of paperwork to resubmit. But we just kept moving through that. And about 6 years after we got married, he became a U.S. citizen.
Wonderful. So now the two of you together minister in detention centers. Is that correct?
There's a ministry here in Georgia called Refugio that serves as a hospitality ministry to families in immigrant detention. So what I had always assumed is that when Billy and I were first married and he was undocumented, I assumed if he had gotten caught or arrested that he would just immediately be deported back to Guatemala. But that is not exactly how it works. And folks are kept in detention centers. And one of the things that is very interesting about our immigration detention process, first of all, 70% of detainees are held in privately run detention centers. And so as a believer, I have a real moral problem with people profiting off of other people's suffering. And so, but what's interesting about immigration specifically is that there's a congressional mandate that says that the U.S. has to keep an average of 34,000 immigrants in detention every night. No other federal law enforcement agency has a mandate of how many people have to be in jail or have to be in prison. But in immigration, this is a set number that every night we have to have that many people in immigration detention, which makes a steady income stream for a lot of these private corporations. But it also means it costs taxpayers $164 a day per immigrant, which comes to $5 million a day that we're spending keeping immigrants in detention. And sometimes that's while people are pursuing their cases. Sometimes that's certain countries won't accept their deportees back to their country. So there's all kinds of reasons why people are in detention. But El Refugio is a ministry that looks at how do we love immigrants who are in detention and their families. And so they have a house where they provide meals, provide shelter for folks who are coming to visit a loved one in detention. And we've been able to work with them with our church, which is a Spanish-speaking congregation who will go and visit with detainees who've requested visitors. And so, you know, I think as as a believer, as the church, as the people of God, when you think about, I was in prison and you visited me, when you have immigrant detainees requesting visitors, then we as the church, we go, regardless of our particular opinions on the situation or whether they think they should or shouldn't have done this. We go and we visit and we listen to their stories and we pray with them if that is, if that's appropriate, and we try to connect with them in ways that are meaningful.
I think you're doing an incredible work, and you're on several levels. The book is Love Undocumented, Risking Trust in a Fearful World by Sarah Quezada. Relevant theological and practical contribution to the immigration debate. Real-life Christian lens on immigration and refugee issues. Scriptural reflections on welcoming the stranger. The news is filled with immigration confusion, and here is one family's story as to how they navigated through a system and what they're doing to answer the call for those who are struggling to get through the system and understand, and to assist those who are in detention, who are still trying to navigate the process themselves. This is going to be an area that affects everyone, whether or not it's immediate family or neighbor family, a tool and a resource you need. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth, and we wish you great success. And of course, a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, and much success on the new book. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.